Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulullah. Thank you everyone for joining us on Muslim Network TV. I'm your host, Edward Ahmed Mitchell. Assalamu alaikum to all of you. Hope you're doing well and staying safe. Today we're going to be discussing Title 42. Many of you may not know what that is, but it's a very important federal law. It's a very important federal regulation, and it's just been changed by the Biden administration, and it's going to impact what's happening at our southern border. To discuss Title 42, the change it's been made, what it means for migrants coming to this country, and for our nation, I want to bring on our special guest, Professor Ernesto Castañeda, who is the director of the Center for Latin American and Latino Studies, the head of the Immigration Lab graduate program at American University. We're very happy to have him with us today. Professor, how are you doing?
Good afternoon, Edward. Doing well, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. So, Professor, just start by telling us, what is Title 42? I think a lot of us may know, but a lot of our viewers may not know what this even is. What is Title 42?
Yes, so Title 42 is a part of the U.S. Code, and it's an old law from the 40s when there was the influenza around the world, and it was written so that the authorities could stop foreigners at the border or ports of entry, the ports, people that could help in the spread of contagious diseases. But it had actually never been used in history until Steve Miller and other advisors of then President Trump thought that there would be a good way for them to close the borders to foreigners around the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. So it went into effect in 2020, and it was just lifted on May 11. Again, the purpose was to supposedly help stop the spread of the COVID pandemic. But as we know, President Trump was not very good in other public policies. So a lot of people say that this had the intended goal of reducing the number of immigrants coming into the country. And that's what it was put into place. So now it's been lifted.
So, what was the effect? And Title 42 was continued during the Biden administration. What was President Biden's rationale for continuing it, and what impact did this have on immigration, legal and otherwise, into America?
Correct. So yes, Biden campaigned that he was going to lift it and remove it. The White House tried a couple of times to lift it, and different courts did not allow that it be lifted. And it became contentious. It became a political issue, and it became also something that the courts held up. But yes, what are the particular effects in terms of migration? Title 42 was something similar to when we had, for example, no planes allowed from China for a while, or from Europe. And then these things became lifted as the pandemic became controlled. We have vaccines and other things. But with Title 42, when people were coming at the U.S.-Mexico border particularly, they will be sent back, particularly people from Central America and Mexico, that they have been doing for a long time. People that couldn't be deported, for example, to Cuba, Venezuela, they were allowed in as well, people from Afghanistan and Ukraine. But what Title 42, the impact it had, particularly was for people asking for asylum, people escaping political persecution in their countries, fearing for their lives, etc. There's part of international law, U.S. law, that somebody can come and ask for asylum, including at the ports of entry. But with the excuse of Title 42, even asylum seekers were being sent back to Mexico or to their countries. That was the main effect of Title 42.
Professor, next question for you. So, how has President Biden gone about rescinding Title 42? What's the new policy that he's implementing? And what is the reaction from the community, the Latino community, the activist community, immigration lawyers? What's the reaction been from the public?
Great question, Edward. So now that Title 42 is over, many people thought, or activists asked, that we went back to the way things were before the pandemic, and that people could come and ask for asylum, get an interview to show that they had fear of persecution, or what is called credible fears, and that they would be allowed to follow the asylum legal process within the United States, like many people do from around the world. Instead, now what we saw with the end of Title 42 is that a number of new policies have been put in place that make asking for asylum at the US-Mexico border much harder. One of the things that people now have to do, if they are located in northern Mexico or in Mexico City, is to use an app in their phones called CBP One, where they have to schedule an appointment to present themselves to ask for admission into the US. The problem with this is that there's tens of thousands of people that want to make an appointment to present their cases, but only around 1,000 people maximum a day are allowed to make the appointments across the whole length of the U.S.-Mexico border. So that's a very frustrating process for many asylum seekers. Also, a lot of immigrants were not necessarily fitting all the criteria or very clear about what asylum is, but still were coming with their families to try to ask for support and help and to come into the United States. And they were showing themselves over and over to immigration authorities, Border Patrol, and others at the ports of entry. And they were counted by the government as encounters. And these are these supposedly record numbers that were being reported by the government and the CBP and the media. But as I argue elsewhere, they included the same people that were counted many times because they will try in different times in different places to see if they could get in, particularly to ask for asylum. There are no people trying to escape through the desert in the middle of the night. A lot of the encounters were people that were presenting themselves. Also, they were presenting themselves multiple times because there were no real negative consequences for doing so. The people were not being, they were not taking their names or their numbers or the biometrics. So that's why it was easy to count them multiple times because they were not identified as particular individuals or cases. Now that we're going back to the pre-pandemic times and Title 8, as it's called, then people can be sent back with the records taken and ask not to come back. And if they try again to enter illegally, which again, they're presenting themselves, it's not an illegal entry, but if they are trying to apply for asylum, and after they have said that they wouldn't be allowed to get asylum, they could be reprimanded, they could be punished, and they could be barred from applying for visas or any other type of entry for 5 or 10 years. So there's stronger punishments now than under Title 42 that make the sending back to Mexico very easy, very like you will do it in a restaurant or something. But now we're again in creating criminal records even or immigration entry records for everybody. So that's why we see less people coming to the border if they don't have the app. Now also the new policies that Biden has instituted is that people can go to centers that they are going to open in the future in countries like Guatemala or Colombia. And there's a number of changes in the law. More importantly, that if somebody's escaping persecution or they want to ask for asylum and they pass on their way to the U.S., other countries that are so-called safe, meaning they are not the country of origin, they should ask for asylum there and be denied before they can ask for asylum in the United States, which would mean that many people will have to ask for asylum in a Central American country or in Mexico, countries that don't have the bureaucracy, the tradition, the infrastructure to process large numbers of asylum seekers quickly, for them to know if they have to get established in Mexico or if they should try soon to apply for asylum in the U.S. after being denied. And they have to prove that. So that's going to make it really hard for them to ask for asylum, and it was going to extend the time, but also going to keep them away from the U.S.-Mexico border itself. And that's where we're seeing less people there and less lines and less people trying to cross.
Final question for you, Professor. What do you expect to happen going forward at the border? Now that Title 42 has been rescinded, what do you expect? We're told that entries at the border have actually dropped, surprisingly. Is that true? What do you think the future holds?
Yes, so we're not only facing the end of Title 42, that was again an state of exception, a bad policy that was part of the pandemic responses that were one more of the anti-immigrant policies that the Trump administration tried, like the Muslim ban. Fortunately, that is gone, but the effects of Title 42 continue to this day. And we see them with people asking for asylum. And again, this not only applies to people from Latin America, this would apply also to people coming from the Middle East, from North Africa, that would be coming through Mexico, as some of them do, and then try to come into the U.S. Via Mexico from Afghanistan, Pakistan, other countries. Now they would also have to show that they have asked for asylum in another country, and they were denied that in order to ask for it here. And they would also probably have to use the app to create the appointment, so making it harder for everybody. So it is a step back in the ability to ask for the right of asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border. One can still do it on the airports if one can fly or have visas, or so if somebody is already within the U.S. or in the process of deportation from the interior of the U.S., one can ask then defensively for asylum. So that hasn't changed. But for people coming, particularly walking from the Caribbean, from South, Central, and North America, through the U.S.-Mexico border is becoming much, much harder. So again, a weakening of asylum. Now, just to end on the positive note, the White House is saying that they are trying to make it so that people don't risk their lives crossing through the Darien jungle or through Mexico and being kidnapped or extorted by authorities. So they are trying to make the asylum process work long distance, more akin to the refugee system, so that people can come already with papers flying into the U.S. already on a way to settle with work permits and all that. That would be good. That would be a big improvement in the processing and the integration of asylum seekers, refugees, immigrants, and create new legal ways to do so. It's working relatively well for some people from Venezuela, from Cuba, from Haiti that have family members already in the United States. So the challenge will be to make sure that all those new processes are put into place correctly, that they work fine, and then that they are large enough that they enough number of people, tens of thousands, can apply to, so that people don't have the incentive or the interest to go through the desert to cross through Mexico to try to present themselves at the border or pass undetected outside of the ports of entry. So if that was the case, that would be a big improvement in making the U.S. system more rational and more orderly. It would be ideal if Congress codified this so they will last more than the Biden administration. We have to see what the courts do. They're already trying to dissuade the government from releasing people into the interior of the U.S. if they don't have already a note from the courts to appear at their immigration hearing in a given time and place. So challenges ahead, but it's very confusing for immigrants. And again, what is for sure, it's that this end of Title 42 does not mean that the border is open to anybody, as some critics were saying beforehand.